Merci Dominique. A few words in French. Merci à Molior pour cette invitation et au comité éditorial. Pour moi, c'est important d'être ici à Montréal parce que depuis 2007 que j'ai commencé à écrire des articles pour des publications canadiennes. Le premier était un article sur l'œuvre de Grégory Tchatansky pour la magazine du SIAC. Et après, depuis 2009 que je travaille et j'écris pour ETC Média, qui est aussi une revue ici de Montréal. Et je veux aussi remercier Isabelle Lelarge et tout le comité éditorial qui ont bien publié ma recherche pendant ces années dans le magazine. Alors pour moi, c'est très intéressant de finalement être venu au Canada. Okay, so I will now switch to English. So my talk today, we're talking about the art market. I want to give like a brief overview of the situation of what I call the interactions between contemporary art, new media, and the art market. That's the best way I can think about phrasing it. And then, since it's a very wide spectrum of things to talk, I will focus particularly on the particularities of art in a digital format. And as I say here, the concepts of access, ownership, and artificial scarcity. As you can see, there is this talk has a certificate of authenticity, so it's a real talk, and I will talk about this concept later too. All right. So the idea is to focus a bit on the fact that in the last 6 to 7 years, there has been an incredible emergence of new platforms, of new companies developing different ways of reaching new customers and collectors through the internet, or using all this digital media that we have, that we are using every day in very, very different ways. So if we think about this, one of the first impressions we have is that the contemporary art market is kind of a latecomer to what is using new media, because it quite went a bit late into the scene. But if we go back a few years earlier, we go to the change of the century, to the beginning of 2000, we will see a bit why this happened, or have a bit of a wider image. When we consider that already when the internet started to boom, when there was the dot-com bubble, there were several companies who started to experiment with the idea of making online auctions. So to bring the concept of the auction to the internet, to reach new customers through the internet, and that in most cases became failed projects with big losses, in millions of dollars. In a time where, of course, as we know, also the dot-com bubble burst, in a time where e-commerce was still not mature. And as you can see here, this is an interesting fact to know that Amazon, it took 7 years for Amazon to return a profit, So this gives us an idea of how, in the beginning of this decade, so e-commerce was not still well developed, and this will be an important thing also for the contemporary art market. But it's also a moment in which there is a greater attention to new media art, to digital art, with exhibitions like the ones you see on top in the Whitney Museum in San Francisco. These exhibitions also spurred the interest to focus a bit more on digital art. It was the year that the Bitforms Gallery was created by Steve Sachs. It was also at that time that Wolf Lieser, who is here with us, was already developing the idea of the Digital Art Museum, and later on would create the DAM Gallery in Berlin and other cities. So it's a time where many things have changed, and now more and more they are converging into the situation that we have right now. Another example, which is quite interesting to consider, is the Saatchi Art website, this platform for selling art online that was launched in 2006 by the Saatchi Art Gallery, and which also had quite a convoluted story because around 2007 it opened as a marketplace for artists where artists could sell their work without any kind of commissions. They could sell their work directly to collectors, to anyone interested in it. And according to the news at the time, there was a rapidly growing number of artists who started to sell their work through this platform, up to 70,000 artists. And there was an estimated $130 million being generated by this platform, which is a number which we don't know exactly how true it is, but the thing is that it was on the press. Then a few years later, Saatchi redesigned the website, decided to start taking commissions, and this continued to develop until recently it was sold, because actually it was not making that much money, but it was sold to another company. And right now the last news is that it's become a partnership with a physical art fair. So all this artwork that was presented online is now going back to a physical art fair. So why I mentioned Saatchi Art here is because arguably it's one of the factors that may have grabbed the attention of the contemporary art market with this apparent success story that there was something going on the internet, and it was interesting to develop it, to go for it and to develop a kind of a business. Also, of course, there was the economic crisis that made the market went down. So there was a need to look for other markets, other collectors. In this graph that you see here, which is from a fair report from this year, we get a very clear image of how art is constantly moving around the world just to have the chance to be sold. So the internet can do that much faster, apparently. And that is also one of the other factors that lead to this renewed interest in the internet and the possibilities of developing the art market there. Finally, another interesting aspect is what this quote from Clay Shirky tells us, that the technology becomes interesting when it's part of the everyday, when it's technologically boring, when all these smartphones, tablets, the internet, etc., social networks, they're not some new thing being developed in a well-funded research lab. They're part of our everyday, everybody uses it, and it becomes socially interesting in the fact that we can go to take it to other contexts, like in this case, the contemporary art market. A good example of this is this ad that was published in Art Forum magazine, the well-known contemporary art magazine, in 2012 by the VIP Art Fair, which was an art fair that was developed exclusively online. And as you can see, so their selling point, the advertising was directed at that potential collector who said, telling him, so you never thought you would buy all this stuff online that you have already buying, so why not buy art? You know? So this is like a good example of how this normalization, this part of everyday life of technology becomes something like a tool. No? So it's important to consider that for the contemporary art market, new media is mainly a tool to sell the same art that they're already selling in the galleries. It's interested in new media, not necessarily in new media art. This is how the VIP art fair looked like. It was like a regular art fair, but put on a browser where you could buy paintings, where you could buy photographs, etc. As far as I remember, there was just one artist actually showing net art, which was Raphael Rosendahl, being presented by Rhizome in a special section for multiples, which also illustrate this idea that the main interest of these players of the contemporary art market is to bring the same art to new audience through these communication channels. Now, Noah Horowitz, which was a director of this VIP art fair, he explained it here very well how there was already many galleries were already using emails and iPads and selling artworks by showing an image of an artwork on a screen. So why not do this online? Because one of the main obstacles for this market to develop is the assumption that nobody would buy an artwork if it's not sightseeing, if it's not in front of it, if you cannot evaluate the artwork directly, if it's just seeing something on a website. But this more or less start to be less true, and this is what this art fair was trying to explore. However, the VIP Art Fair was a failed experiment. It didn't go so well as expected, didn't sell so much. It has a few editions, and finally it didn't continue. It became first it had a temporary nature. It was just taking place for a few days, like physical art fairs, but then it became a platform that would be all year long for customers, collectors, to access the artworks being offered by the galleries. It was soon bought by another company, ArtSpace, which already had a platform for this, offering artworks from the galleries to collectors. ArtSpace, in turn, was bought by Phaidon, the contemporary art publisher, which introduced also the idea of combining their work with the distribution. I mean, the publishing books about contemporary art with selling contemporary art on the platform. So you can see here this connection. And then there's other examples. I would like to also present this other platform, which is like main competing platform, Artsy. Founded in 2010, and this is an interesting example because, like ArtSpace, it's mainly a platform that gives access to artworks from galleries where they can be bought directly from the website, but it also shows images from exhibitions and museum collections. And what is interesting here is that when this platform was initially conceived. It was conceived by Carter Cleveland, this young engineer who felt that collectors had a very difficult time finding the art they want because they had to go through the problem of going through 2 gallery exhibitions, one after another, looking for art, that they felt intimidated by the ambience of the art gallery, and that was a kind of inefficient way of looking for art, So applying his way of seeing the situation, he decided that establishing this website where you could find art, and when there is an algorithm that can look for similar art to the art that you already selected, like you have when you buy or when you look for a product in Amazon, that this could be the solution. And as you see in this quote, so with this typical startup bravado, he was saying that there would be no more inefficiency or intimidation, and that everyone would be able to discover beautiful art. So this, which was initially intended as a kind of a social network, through the investment of several investors, among them galleries, Larry Gagosian, became a kind of a different platform, more adapted to high-end collectors, more in the sense of contemporary art, the contemporary art market, which now is focused on what it says here, bringing art to the users from all the leading galleries, fairs, and museums, and also focusing very strongly on the editorial part, where any subscriber, any user of this website usually is getting regularly on his email account, so articles about the art world that also contribute to shape his or her view of how the artwork is evolving, which are the most relevant artists, what is going on actually in a situation where, as we know, we are drowning in information. There's too much information, so we need this information to be sorted out, to be put in place, and this is more or less what these platforms are doing. So trying to summarize this in a kind of a graph, which is something I like to do. as you can see here, were the artwork. So this is my way of summarizing contemporary art. So a frame picture and a weird-looking sculpture. But anyway, you can get the idea. This is artworks can be sold at galleries, are shown in shows, art fair, museums, biennials, etc. And this, on one side, goes to the online platform in the form of being part of the catalog. On the other side is being reflected by this editorial, by these articles. And then finally, the idea is that the online platform has this possibility, it's potentially can act as an intermediator between the collector and the gallery, so helping the collector get to buy the art, but also helping him discover the art and shaping what his view of the art world will be. So this is also an interesting aspect of how this is developing. And in sum, it is also about this concept that I was introducing before, that the contemporary art market is mainly interested in this new media, in internet, etc., as a way of providing access, as a way of reaching out to these new customers and selling them the art that is already in the galleries. So, according to some of the reports, this is one of the most quoted report, as far as I know, from Hiscock, which draws like a very optimistic view of how this online art market is going to evolve. It seems to be booming, but it's also interesting to consider what kind of art is being sold, which is mostly artworks at prices below £10,000, and that what is mostly being sold are paintings, followed by print, photography, as you can see, and media art is really one of the less sold kind of art, you know. So again, is what we see, you know. That is the same art that is being sold, but through a different channel. Then also the internet, the new media has given opportunities for some platforms to develop things that could have been kind of disruptive or have a chance to be disruptive in the art market. One example is Paddle8. This is an online auction firm website which is linked to the auction house Philips, and which is focused on this kind of artworks below $100,000, but which the different thing is that they organize these auctions online, so they have more flexibility, given the fact that the artworks are not moved anywhere until they are sold. So it is more easier to organize this kind of auctions that with a regular auction that implies many more cost. And some artworks, if they are below a certain price, it's not worth it to take them to auction due to all the cost involved. So the fact is that the reason why I show this is because Paddle8 had the opportunity to experiment a bit more, and they did a series of auctions of digital art, which at some point seemed to be like a breakthrough for digital art into the contemporary art market in a very unusual way, because we had some very young artists, some of them were not even represented by galleries, who were directly entering the contemporary art market through an auction on one of the major auction houses, you know. And there was this auction there. There was young artists who were selling their works at prices ranging from $500 to $6,000. Most of the artworks were bought, but it was really a tiny section of this market, and it actually did not much imply this kind of expected introduction of the digital art in the contemporary art market, except for a few artists, like for instance Petra Cartwright, who was firstly introduced or known for her YouTube videos and has been developing this kind of digital paintings, which have been more successful in the art market to date, which also shows us this kind of still the preference that still exists for this kind of bidimensional work and for things that remind us more of this more classical formats. So then We also have another effort to introduce digital art in the contemporary art market is being carried out by art galleries, like the DAM Art Gallery by Wolf Lieser, who is with us today, and who will explain more about the story of the gallery. But what I want to point out about the gallery and about the work of Wolf is his extraordinary effort to introduce, also to educate the audience, the collectors, to bring value to the digital art pioneers who have been quite forgotten, by creating first a digital art museum, then a digital art award, which was like a lifetime award given to some artists, and then in the gallery curating exhibitions like this one, which was last year, Estetica, which celebrated 50 years of computer art by putting together in the gallery some of the historical proto drawings by these pioneers, alongside other works, also proto drawings by emerging artists and more positioned artists. So to show how there is this historical line and how this is still also relevant. Also, I'd like to introduce these words by Wolf from one of his texts, in which he also introduces this idea of how the art market requires these original artifacts, requires this scarcity of the art object, which is one of the aspects that I wanted to mention. And also he already views in this text from 2011, he already foresees this possibility of a different way of consuming art, of accessing art, like we are already seeing art, music, or other content on our screens. Another gallery that has also developed an outstanding work in this line is Bitforms, which, as I mentioned, was opened in 2001, which also saw a moment of great success, selling well some of the works, attracting a lot of attention. And Steve Sachs already saw also the possibility that in the future curators would have a screen at their homes where they could just rotate different artworks, so that the fact that we have digital artworks allows for also this kind of flexibility. He already developed a prototype for this with some touch screens. These were presented in the Ars Electronica Festival in 2003, which with this possibility of having the screen hung on a wall like it's a painting, and then be able, in this case, to interact with it and to select from a menu, from a selection of artworks. He also developed what he called the Software Art Space, which was a website that offered software art in unlimited editions that were delivered in a custom CD-ROM package. It would for prices around $125 in editions of 5,000. So already playing with this idea of the possibility of the digital artwork to be sold in large editions at lower prices. However, this website is no longer working, but it was also an early experiment in that sense. Also, within the context of the art market, I would like to mention the Variation Media Art Fair curated by Dominique Mulon, who is also, as he says, developing since 2014, introducing this idea of extracting the media art from the black box and contextualizing it inside the white cube, which is also another important part of having new media art being introduced in the art market, its presence being normal and not secluded to a particular space, to this kind of a fish tank or a space for kind of different things. Then what about the artists? Well, the artists have been extremely creative in developing all sorts of ways of making their art being sold. They have also traditionally, galleries have worked with the artists to develop these models where the art can be sold to a collector, considering all these aspects that we have mentioned and have been mentioned these previous days about preservation, about also this scarcity, which is so needed. And then I cannot go through all this, but I invite you to have a look at this text that I wrote about enumerating a few of these strategies being developed by the artists to sell online art, which are really interesting. So going back to scarcity, I would like to present this example by Joe Hamilton, who was one of the artists selling at this Patronage auction. He was selling this work, Hypergeography, which is a multiple artwork, which is a Tumblr blog, which is also a video, and he presented here one of these videos. And what I found interesting about this is how the video is presented as a frame image, which contains the USB stick that contains the artwork. So the file becomes something inside a frame, and how the frame is this object that contextualizes something as art, and how this digital file has to be turned into an object to have this sense of ownership. So in case you're wondering, yes, you can remove the USB stick from the frame, but it's already interesting that it has to be part of this framed object. The artist himself mentions that how when you buy an edition of a digital artwork, of course you don't have this exclusive access, you just have a copy, and how he saw this as the importance of having the object having what he calls this official token of ownership. So this need to have this one specific thing, which is quite interesting when we're talking about digital files. Here I would like to mention what Nelson Goodman said about autographic and allographic art, in the sense of saying that just as music is an allographic art because you have a score and every time the score has to be played, so there is no difference between original and copy. Every copy of the score is an original score. When an artwork is a digital file, we have the same situation with the code. The code has to be interpreted every time, so we don't have this differentiation between the original and the copy. So that leads us to how do we sell this? How do we create this scarcity? That we have to create the scarcity by generating things around this file that make it unique, or by limiting access to it. In that sense, I'd like to mention sedition. Rory Blaine is here with us today. We'll explain it much better. But just briefly to say how this platform launched in 2011, and it's a platform that is dedicated to sell digital editions of artworks at lower prices in large editions, so a bit what we saw before with the software art space, by a famous artist. He became well known by selling digital editions of artists such as Damien Hirst for very low prices. As you can see here, we have several well-known artists and other more emerging artists with these low prices. And how the thing is that when you buy an edition in Sedition, you can access it from your laptop, smartphone, computer, etc. But the artwork stays in Sedition server, so you're not downloading it, just accessing it. So what you buy, what you pay for, is the right to access this artwork, just as you do on a streaming service, Spotify, etc. You may download still images, but you don't have the right to print them. So there is all this kind of system in place to control how the artwork can be distributed. Of course, you get a certificate of authenticity, which, as we have discussed, it's a JPEG. It's a digital certificate of authenticity, so it's more like a symbol of your ownership of the work, because mainly what you are buying, as I said, is the right to access the work and the right to have your name inscribed as the owner in Sedition's database. So also as an owner, what you can do is you can sell the artwork, but you can sell the artwork once the edition is been sold out inside Sedition's own marketplace. So you can little bit play this game of obtaining some kind of benefit from reselling the artwork at a higher price but within this controlled marketplace. So, as I said, the artwork never leaves sedition. Even in the case when you have an artwork that you can download, like data editions, that creates has this commission of artworks, different kinds of artworks. You can, when you buy one, you get also a certificate of authenticity, like this one, which is hard to read and expensive to print, but of course you cannot print it, you cannot extract it from your computer, and it's also subject to a very strong set of restrictions of the use of the file. No? So as you can see here, you can download, etc., but you cannot later on print it. You can only view it in your own screen. You cannot distribute it. You cannot make it available to others, etc. So as you can see, in general, there is this this idea of setting in place all these mechanisms to control the digital file. Of course, this is not new. This is already what has been happening for decades with video art. As you can see in this example, for instance, a well-known example of the videotapes and films initiatives by Leo Castelli and Iara Sonnabend, that also explore the idea of selling editions, large editions at lower prices, which didn't actually work. But it's just an illustration how video art also is currently being sold with all these restrictions on use, which also has generated on the part of video art collectors this discussion about what do we do with the video art, since a collector can pay a lot of money and then have very limited rights on the artwork itself. No? So here's another quote by collector Alain Servet, who mentions this idea that we're in this era of Netflix and Apple TV, and there could be another platform for distributing, for instance, these video artworks in which the files are secure, the files are controlled, and the collector would have this possibility, or the artist too would have this possibility of determining how the file is distributed and also selling it or buying it, etc., without other restrictions. An example of this, there are several companies who are actually developing these systems of handling this digital artworks, digital art files, and making them available in different ways. This is Neon, which is a platform that is being developed that offers collectors, or for instance artists, the opportunity to upload the master of a file. Let's say we talk about a video art file, and then the platform automatically creates different versions of this file. It also has a system that automatically updates the file to newer formats as they appear, so as a form of preservation. It has a way of managing who can access the file and even edition it or sell it, transfer the property to other people. And it also includes a player that, when it's connected to a television, determines the characteristics of that screen and downloads the proper file which adapts to those specifications, so that the whole system of displaying the file can be seamless and also can be controlled, because then the artist, for instance, or the collector can have control over how long that file will play on that player. So as you see, that's an example of ways of trying to control these files, trying to make them not so volatile, in order to be able to participate within the conditions of the art market. Okay. So other companies that are working with this are several companies that are developing what is called digital art frames, which is basically a screen with most of the times a wooden frame, so it looks more like an art frame, with an embedded computer connected to the internet, and a smartphone app, so that you can control your screen from your smartphone, access a collection, and then change it as long as you like, anytime you like. No? So this that I've shown are some of the companies, And here you see some of the different models. So they are being developed, different models for different audience with different customers with different price ranges, different specifications, which already tells us about a wider audience, a wider type spectrum of customers that we might initially think of. Again, another graph to kind of explain this thing is how all these platforms or these the digital devices, they generate this idea that they have an online platform. Most of them currently are offering on one side original art, like digital video art created by artists specifically for these platforms or adapted to these platforms. And then, which is also interesting, museum collections, which in many cases are just cropped copies of a Van Gogh or of a Toulouse-Lautrec, as you can see here, which is adapted also to the screen for people who want to mostly decorate their homes. And as you can see here in the rest, the online platform then provides this content through different channels, which can be the digital art frame, the Apple TV, so some off-the-shelf software too, and hardware, and of course your laptop, smartphone, etc. So that in this case, what I call the user can, on one side, buy an edition, buy the frame, and then access the content of the frame, or also subscribe to a streaming service. So in this case, we are shifting from the idea of buying an artwork to buying a device that will provide us a content to which we are subscribed. So the art turns into a content that is adapted to a frame. So the interesting thing here is how the frame, the concept of a frame becomes important, how the fact that this art can enter our homes depends on this device that we have to hang on the wall, how we keep into this concept of the painting of the thing that we see that is hanging on the wall. And then an example is Sedition has also recently developed this idea of the Sedition frame, which in this case is basically a box where you can put your iPad in, and you can access the artworks that you have bought on Sedition by putting them on the frame, because actually that is one of the problems, that you can buy the artwork, but if you don't have it somewhere where you see it, then it just is just not present. Okay, another company that developed during these years is that from Paris, which initially, and this is why I'm presenting it here, it's interesting, initially it also developed a whole set of devices like a screen, like a hard drive where you could access your artworks, an app, and then a selection of curated exhibitions that would be displayed on your screen, and a catalog that would arrive home, so you could have the art at your home in the screen with, and then this art would be constantly updated. So recently, Dad decided to not use these specific devices, but go for off-the-shelf hardware like the Apple TV. So in order to make it more available to a general kind of customer, because before it was more aimed at a high-end customer with very expensive screens and devices. So now this is trying to go for another type of customer. And then also, which is quite telling, changing its own, the way it is defined, from being the digital art device to being digital art on demand, which tell us how it is switching from offering a device, as others do, to offering us a service. In this case, the streaming of online exhibitions that arrive to our device. So streaming is another trend that is developing more and more. And again, also Sedition is developing, and it has from some time now an art stream service where you can also subscribe, and then you get a selection of our works from Sedition shown on your screen. So all of this on one side then leads us to this idea that we are, these companies, this kind of showing art in a digital format is aiming for a different kind of customer, different kind of collector. This is a good example of when Sedition launched. It was mainly advertising this way, as you can have an artwork, an original from a well-known artist for a very low price. And this makes me think of the concept of the long tail. So if you're not familiar with this concept, is this idea that instead of focusing on the bestsellers, which would be on the left part of this graph, so the few products that sell a lot, if you can have, for instance, an online distribution, you can sell for little to many customers, which also generates a profit. So translating this into the art market, we can see something like this, which is like when the price of the artwork is very high, the number of potential buyers is very low, and then we have the big artwork, the artworks, the very expensive artworks by the big names that few people can buy. And as we go down the line, as we go down this curve, we go to the level of posters, merchandising, all these kind of things any of us can buy in a museum, which is lower prices but represents the artwork that we have seen and that we cannot possess. So what I find interesting, this is my interpretation of what Sedition has done, is to jump from one to the other by offering you something which is from a blue chip artist at the price level of something which is which could be merchandising, by offering it as an original. So that is an interesting concept of how this is developing, and how we could, through these digital art formats, the art market could develop into another area of customers, another kind of buyer or collector, which is usually absent from this system. Sorry. Then finally, I want to quote Walter Benjamin, usually quoted when we think about all this the digital art, about the aura of the artwork, about this scarcity that I mentioned. It's interesting to say that he also said that this technological reproducibility of the artwork frees it from its existence from ritual, and that the work can have entirely new functions. So looking at it in this sense, I think it's very interesting to keep looking at how this part of the market is developed, and how these new ways of experiencing, of distributing art can be put in place, and what it means for the general perception of contemporary art, and particularly digital art. So to wrap it up, this is an image, a promotional image from one of these companies, Electric Objects, where you see this home environment with this couple relaxing, and on the wall you see a couple of artworks, and one of them is the Electric Objects screen, which is displaying, in this case, a photograph. And I think I want to see this image sometimes freaks out people, but I want to see it in a positive way, as a way of how are we expecting to introduce art in people's homes, and how this can create a different relationship with art, which is not something that we just go to see in a gallery or see in a museum, but which can be part of our everyday experiences. And I think that is quite a positive thing. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
Les références, est-ce qu'on va y avoir accès a posteriori, les références?
Oui, il va y avoir en fait une publication sur le site de la Fondation Daniel Langlois.
Oui,
Est-ce que tu vas mettre toutes ces références?
Oui, je ferai tout ça dans un texte avec tous les liens, avec tout. Alors, ouais.
Puis toutes les, en fait, tout est filmé et mis en ligne aussi. Donc vous pouvez revoir aussi. C'est sur YouTube qu'il y a les vidéos en fait des présentations.
Je suis conscient que je vous ai métraillé avec beaucoup d'informations, donc excusez-moi.
I have a question. You presented the artwork as an object we buy, but usually when you are buying art, it's not an object, it's a social status. Okay, so how can we market social status through this kind of distribution if we cannot express this social status?
I think that is something that has to develop as it has developed in our relationship with technology. In this sense, one thing that I find quite interesting, for instance, with electric objects, is they have what they call the Art Club, which is a website where there's all the artworks they have in their collection. And next to the artwork, you can see how many people are displaying the artwork in their screen at that time. What I find interesting about this is that it turns the idea of usually you buy an artwork so that it's unique and only you have it. They turn it into being part of a community. So if you go there and there's 500 people who had the same artwork that you have at home, then you can interpret that as I'm part of all these people we are sharing this idea, we like the same artist, etc. So I think that can develop as also a social thing, the same way that we like to share with others the TV series we like, or the movies we like, or the music we like. That can also happen so that you can have some social status if the artwork that you're showing at home in your screen is something that is interesting, so that your friends come in and say, wow, who's that artist? I like it. And you know where to find the good artists, etc., etc. So why not? This is also a possibility.
Oh, hey, Pau, great talk.
Thanks.
And I'm curious, there's a platform called OpenFrame, and it's an open source art frame, and it has a cloud service. And you get a Raspberry Pi, these $35 computers, and you get your own screen, frame it. And what's interesting beyond that it's open source and you can just go out and build it is it has support for things sort of beyond just still image and videos. Right now, in addition, it supports web content. So you have live dynamic web art, and it supports something called shaders, which is a little more geeky, but it's sort of this graphic GPU language. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Yeah,
of course. We have two parts here, which is one is the technological part, and the other one is the art world part. So technologically, it still has to be more developed. Also, there is obviously the fact that now this is divided into many different companies. Each of them is developing their own thing. So if you buy an electric objects screen, then you have to go with their selection, with their catalog. You also have the option of putting up an image, as far as I remember, but this is not well still developed. It's very fragmented, So open source initiatives are interesting, and of course, this should be developed, or there should be some kind of standard where you don't have to worry about what kind of screen you have. You just have to worry about the art you bought. Because right now, in a sense, it's like going to a gallery, buying an artwork, and then you cannot take the artwork from that gallery, or you have to always buy from the gallery. So there is this kind of limitations which are not in place. But also, it has to be considered the part of the art world where there has to be also some kind of, there is the, how you say that? The recognition of the platform. I mean, it's also important. It's not just important that you provide a content, but what content do you provide? Which kind of artists are there? What does it mean? Because it's not just that you have a long catalog of artwork, but as with galleries and so, they have an image of themselves. They have a reputation. That's what the word I was looking for. The reputation is very important. In that sense, for instance, I think that what Sedition did at the beginning, and we were talking about this yesterday, was very clever, that when they launched with this Damien Hirst JPEGs, with this Tracy Emin animated GIFs, which made no sense, because it was just a JPEG of an image, that an artwork that is not meant for the screen and so. But the thing was to enter the market by using these big names. Okay, so I think there is also this other part, that you don't. It's not just having a good technological framework, a good software, etc. But then that you must have a good selection, and that's where you have to work with the artists, with the galleries, with curators, etc. to set up the context that will give a specific value to this content. So this is something that still has not found a perfect solution, I think.
Hello. The first generation of net artists, including Jody, for example, were not, during the 90s, interested in the art market.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say the second generation of the 2000s, including, for example, Raphael Rosendahl, finally sold their artworks through the internet. Nowadays, it looks like, if we consider your presentation, your brilliant presentation, that platforms like that, like Sedition, like some other Padolate, are more visible than the artists themselves, I mean, with their website. And, but it also looks like let's call them the third generation, with including artists like Joe Hamilton, for example, are very interesting artists because they're I think, moving back to the white cube. And these events, I mean, Padolate, don't you think that Edition and Dad, who collaborated with the Museum of Modern Art, Padolate with the auction fair, I mean, don't you think that it's some kind of back to the real space, back to the white cube, back to the event, makes it possible to use the internet, but with a smarter way than the 90s of the 2000s?
Of course. On one side, I'd like to just also underscore that I have focused on this particular thing. This is just one part of the art market. Of course, the galleries are still there. Of course, artists are selling different ways. Of course, there are artists who are not working in the art market and they are doing fine. So this is a very wide ecosystem. And in that sense, I think in general there is a more normalized presence of digital art in all everywhere, and also that these artists are developing. It's also very interesting, all the different strategies that artists are developing on their own to sell their art through the galleries or to find other ways. But about what you said about the online thing, and since you mentioned the early net art artists, I always think about this work by Heath Bunting, Own, Be Owned, or Remain Invisible, which I think is also what is going on, that potentially you can reach anyone on the internet, but in the end there's all these systems put in place for the real visibility. So it's very different if you set up something like this on your own website as an artist, or if you participate in a platform that is already developing a lot of things. And also that is part of what you said about returning to the gallery, which is to the physical space, which a very good example is the Transfer Gallery in Brooklyn, which was actually made for all these young artists who have already done a lot of things on the internet, and they just want to go to the real space because they miss the white cube, because even if we criticize it, the white cube provides this context that contemporary art needs to be seen as art. And that is an important thing. No? So I think both things are combined. I also see it, for instance, with post-internet artists, how there is the need to return to the gallery to be visible, and also to have the possibility of selling the art, because it is still very strong, the need to have an object or to have a specific thing that is bought. And I think the two tendencies are quite combined. Mm-hmm. Of course. Yeah, that. Yes, this has been over and over, the criticism towards all these kinds of platforms, the VIP Art Fair, for instance, that all the social aspect of the presence, of the physical presence is missing, and the art world is a social scene, and in which each one of us is playing a role. And this role is better played in person and within this social context than online, of course.
This is not really a question, but to underline some of what you're saying. I can't remember the source of this study, which robs my point of some of the impact, but there's been a number of reports recently which really specify the importance of context. It's been proved through a number of psychological studies that if you place something in the proverbial white cube, i.e. if you tell somebody this is an artwork, the Duchampian ideal of this is an artwork because I say it's an artwork, it does change the way people look at it. They've now studied and proved you actually use different parts of your brain to consider a work presented as an art piece within a white cube as you would if you encountered that piece within a more general environment. I think that's one of the reasons that artists, collectors, and people naturally gravitate back to the white cube. It's all about re-establishing that context before you can take it back out and experience it within your everyday life.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's no coincidence that luxury boutiques present their products in the same way as a gallery, by making the product individual, setting up a very staged presentation of the artwork, very luxurious, very neat, because that provides an extra value to the artwork. If in the end, if you want to sell something for $10,000, $100,000, you have to set up a particular content for it.